Welcome back, everyone. I'm so glad you're here for part 2 of the DIY Period Recovery Starter Guide. If you haven't listened to the first module yet, I really recommend starting there. It will help everything we talk about today make more sense. I'm your host, Caitlin Weaver, a certified hypothalamic amenorrhea practitioner who has walked this journey myself. And if you've made it this far, I just want to say I'm proud of you. Taking the time to learn and care for your body is a huge step toward healing. In this module, we're going to talk about 3 key pillars that support the body's recovery: nutrition, exercise, and lifestyle. These areas work together to signal to your body that it's safe, that there's enough energy and enough rest for your hormones to function the way they were designed to. By the end of this module, my hope is that you'll understand how these 3 pillars work together to help your body feel safe enough to restore your cycles. So let's dive in and talk about what true nourishment, rest, and balance look like in practice. And as before, while I am a certified holistic hypothalamic amenorrhea practitioner, I am not a doctor and not your practitioner. So this information is generalized and for educational purposes only. You should always consult your own healthcare provider. And if you want more specific guidance for your journey, I also offer my own coaching program as well. So let's get started. We're going to start by unpacking the nutrition piece, looking at how carbs, fat, and proteins each play a vital role in restoring your cycle. And then we're going to talk about some exercise, what types of movements maybe you might want to pause, and how to reintroduce activity in a way that supports your body and your healing. And then we'll talk about lifestyle considerations, things like sleep and stress, that can sometimes be overlooked, but actually play a really big role in recovery. So I want to start by talking about blood sugar regulation, because this will be the foundation for a lot of the things that we need to know. Blood sugar regulation, this is like the big thing that people need to understand, does not mean your blood sugar is a flat line. Rather, it describes having your blood sugar levels ebb and flow within a constant range. We do not want blood sugar to be always high or always really low, because that's going to put a stress on your body. However, we should not fear having an insulin response, as that's totally normal, and it will keep your blood sugars in that range we need. And we can regulate that by pairing carbs with protein and or fat, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. And when our blood sugar is not regulated, as I said, that's going to be a stress on the body. If it's too high, the pancreas must release insulin to bring it back down, and if it is too low, cortisol is going to be released to bring it back up. And this also comes back to some of the hormones we talked about in the last module, because estrogen is a key regulator of insulin sensitivity. So when your estrogen is low, as it typically is in HA, insulin resistance is going to be more common. With HA, we also see that it's typical to see blood sugar levels drop really, really low because there's either long gaps between meals or that maybe women are not eating enough carbohydrates. So speaking of carbohydrates, that brings me to talking about carbohydrates, because they play a central role in recovery, but they've become a major source of fear in our culture today. Carbs are really important for recovery and fertility for a number of reasons, but I'm just going to go through some with you here. So the first reason is carbs are your brain's source of fuel. So your brain needs glucose to run, and that's going to come most easily from carbohydrates. Hypothalamic amenorrhea starts in the brain, specifically the hypothalamus. If your brain doesn't have enough energy, it's going to prioritize survival over reproduction. So when it senses that low energy availability, it shuts down the signal that tells your ovaries to function. And to turn it back on, you have to first give your brain the fuel that it needs. So again, hypothalamus is in the brain. So HA starts in the brain. So we need to give the brain the fuel it needs. But we also have to give the ovaries the fuel that they need too. Your ovaries need glucose. Glucose helps your follicles grow and mature. And then we need those follicles to grow and mature in order for estrogen to be produced. Glucose is also needed for ovulation and supporting a healthy luteal phase, which is going to be that second half of your cycle. And as well, the cells in your ovaries use ATP, which is a form of glucose. And so without enough glucose, this process cannot function optimally. And on top of that, in your ovaries, there's also an energy sensor called the AMPK that can influence the function of the ovaries. This sensor turns on when your body is under nutritional stress, which happens when you don't have enough glucose in your system. So I find that really interesting. Like, you can't trick the brain, you can't trick your ovaries. They're both sensing that low energy availability and low glucose in your body. As well as when I was talking about blood sugar, low carb intake often leads to a low blood sugar, which triggers your body to release cortisol to try to get that blood sugar back up. Elevated cortisol signals to your brain that the body is under stress, further suppressing the hypothalamus and disrupting that hormone balance. And finally, a final reason why carbs are so important is that when you eat carbohydrates, your body releases insulin, as we've already said, which helps your glucose move into your cells to be used as energy. But insulin actually does more than just regulate blood sugar. It also lowers your levels of sex hormone binding globulin, SHBG. I talked about that briefly in the last module. So SHBG is often elevated in those with hypothalamic amenorrhea, and as the name suggests, it binds to hormones like estrogen and testosterone, sex binding, and it makes them unavailable for use. And since HA is often marked by low estrogen levels, reducing SHBG through adequate nutrition, including eating enough carbs, can actually help support your body in restoring healthy hormone levels. So let's just briefly as well talk about the elephant in the room, keto, because we can't get away from its influence in the media or in the lunchroom. So it's important to know that there's actually quite a bit of research that shows the downsides of low-carb diets. So just like a couple things for you is that, for one, LDL cholesterol, or your bad cholesterol, can rise significantly after just 4 weeks on keto. Women's endurance performance has been shown to decline on low-carb diets. When you cut out things like fruits and grains and starchy vegetables, you're going to be missing out on a lot of key nutrients that your body actually needs. And then during pregnancy, and yes, I know if you have HA, you can't be pregnant, but it's important to know for in the future, during pregnancy, keto may actually raise the risk of a low birth weight or neural tube defects. So while keto may seem appealing or even might have helped you lose weight, it's really going to be supportive for your period health, your fertility, and just your overall long-term well-being. As well, we should probably also talk about diabetes, and for that one, the research is mixed. So there are a few studies that do show that a high carb intake can negatively impact your blood sugar, but many others, especially those that focus on women, show that including high quality carbs like whole grains can actually improve blood sugar regulation and lower the risk of type 2 diabetes. So overall, carbs are not the enemy. The big thing is just when you eat them, you want to pair them with a protein or a fat to kind of help lower that blood sugar spike, to eat them in combination. So what carbs should you be eating in period recovery? First, it's important to know that ultimately, all carbs are going to be broken down into glucose, your body's preferred fuel. The difference in if you eat a piece of white bread or if you eat a potato is how fast those carbs are going to be digested and what else they bring with them. Do they bring fiber, vitamins, minerals? Whole grains and other high fiber carbs are really great for your digestion and for making you feel full. But in recovery, too much fiber can actually backfire. It can make you feel overly full, making it harder for you to eat the amount of food you need. And it can also sometimes cause digestive discomfort if you eat too much fiber. And that's why variety is so important. Not only do different carbs bring a different nutrient profile, but variety also helps with breaking out of those rigid rules of like, I must only eat this or I can never eat that. So like, though I might not say they have the highest nutrient mineral profile, I love my father-in-law's Saturday morning pancakes and I'm going to enjoy those. And I know that they are going to support my period recovery when I put my butter, my peanut butter on them. Maybe I have some banana with them as well. So what about gluten-free diets? You can recover from HA without eating gluten, but it's worth asking yourself, why did you go gluten-free in the first place? Have you always had a true intolerance, or was this a choice made during restriction or something else happening in your life? Some people absolutely cannot eat gluten because of celiac disease, but many others, that tolerance actually, they can tolerate more gluten after they recover from HA. And that's because estrogen and progesterone play a huge role in gut health. Surprise, it's not just reproduction they help with. Low hormone levels can make digestion harder, and when we restore the levels, digestion will often improve. And this can sometimes feel like a little bit of a catch-22. You need to eat more food to restore your hormones, but without those hormones, your gut may struggle. So it's going to take some gentle experimentation, some patience, and just slowly building up and trying different things with time. Fat also plays a really important role in recovery, especially for balancing blood sugar and supporting hormone health. So when we eat carbs with a fat or with a protein, digestion will slow down. The nutrients form what we would call a bolus in the gut, which helps keep your blood sugar from spiking too quickly. And this steady release of glucose is less stressful for the body. Fat is also going to be the most energy dense macronutrient, providing more calories per gram than protein or carbs. And it also is kind of cool. It requires less energy to break down. That makes it especially valuable in hypothalamic amenorrhea, where the body's already in an energy deficient state and we need to get sufficient fuel. So fat's a great thing to be adding into your diet. And beyond just energy, fat also helps you feel satiated after meals and is essential for absorbing fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K. Now, what about the type of fat should you be eating? Because us with hypothalamic amenorrhea, we love our hard and fast rules of eat this, don't eat this. But I'm not going to tell you what to eat and what not to eat because the research is really mixed on what's best. But for HA, really the focus should be on getting a variety of fats with an emphasis maybe on omega-3 fatty acids. So things like fatty fish, chia seeds, flax seeds, and walnuts. But the biggest thing I really want to mention is that while plant sources are helpful, you should eat those fats. Avocado is awesome. Animal sources of fat are going to be more bioavailable and more nutrient dense, which can be really beneficial in recovery. But the biggest thing I want to say is just don't fear fat. Get a variety, your vegetables, they shouldn't look dry. Your toast shouldn't look dry. Make sure you're including enough of those fats. Protein is just as important as carbs and fat in recovery. One of protein's unique roles is in the luteal phase. So that second half of your cycle. So we're not there yet if you still have HA, you haven't had a period yet, but you may find that once you get your period, getting that second half of your cycle can sometimes be a little bit of a struggle. So protein has really helped with supporting progesterone levels in that second phase, which is critical if you want to, say, get pregnant afterwards. Beyond that, protein is essential for building muscle because that's going to help raise your metabolism, which is an important piece of recovering from hypothalamic amenorrhea, is restoring your metabolism. But when I say building muscle, I'm not saying that you should go out and start bodybuilding to try and get your period back. I'm just saying by eating protein, you're going to help with some of that muscle synthesis. Protein is also the building blocks for making hormones, so we do need to make sure we're getting enough of it. So as a practical guideline, what I'd like to say is use the palm method, okay? So have a protein serving roughly the size of your palm 3 times per day. And for many women in recovery, that's already going to be a huge increase compared to what they're already starting with. But it can make a big difference in hitting your protein needs. We do have to be careful though with protein. If you swing on the other side of the spectrum and you love protein, make sure you're not getting too much, that you're neglecting carbs and fat, because protein can make you feel very full and not allow you to eat enough food. It's also helpful to maybe have a disguised form of protein in some of your snacks. So things like yogurt, milk, hummus, those sort of things that are going to have protein, but they're either going to have some carbs as well or some fat, or a mix of all three is a really awesome thing to add in. I also want to briefly talk about vegan and vegetarian diets. Animal proteins are going to be uniquely important in recovery because they're going to contain all your essential amino acids. They're going to be highly bioavailable, and they're going to also come packaged with extra nutrients that you might need, like folate, vitamin A, and zinc. And they're also going to carry fats with them, okay? It's not pure protein, just some fat, so you're kind of getting 2 in 1. So while it is possible to recover while eating a plant-based diet, it's going to be a lot harder. So if you're really committed to being vegan, I really recommend that you try to get as much variety as you can by maybe trying different plant proteins to try and get as many of your amino acids as you can. And again, just like when we talked about maybe why are we gluten-free, consider why are you vegetarian or vegan? Is it about the environment, or is it about you trying to maintain a sense of control or holding on to food rules? I say that completely with love. We all have our food rules we used to carry with us, but it's just something worth considering about why it is that you're choosing it. So, how much should you be eating? You want to cut off line that I shouldn't go above this. And you may have heard the 2,500 calorie rule for recovery. And while that number is helpful as a starting point, it's actually often too low for women in period recovery. But most important, period recovery isn't just about a number, it's about actually getting enough of different foods. So I don't recommend calorie tracking. I never tracked my calories in period recovery, and I still recovered my period. What I would suggest is to use like a plate approach, which is when you picture like your normal size dinner plate, not like the small dinner dessert ones, but a normal size dinner plate. Fill half of it with some form of carbohydrates, have a quarter of it protein, and a quarter of it with some lower fiber vegetable like roasted root vegetables and lots of oil. And then I'd also make sure that there's a visible fat source. Maybe you add butter into your rice. And then also have like a serving of dairy, like cheese or milk or something on the side. I know not every meal is perfectly laid out like this, but that can be a general rule of thumb. If you eat that 3 times a day, to make sure that you're getting enough food. And then on top of that, I would add 3 snacks that combine a carb with either a protein or a fat or a mix. One of those could even be a dessert. Recovery isn't about being rigid, but really you need those 3 good sized meals and then those 3 snacks to be enough. And it's also important to know that sometimes when you're going through recovery, your body's going to shift into what we'd call a refeeding state, where you feel just like impossibly hungry. And it's your body just asking for what it needs. So lean into it. If you're hungry, you eat, even if it's more than those 3 meals, 3 snacks. Over time, your hunger cues will balance out. But it's okay if you need more food than that, especially if you do have some activity in. Like what I'm suggesting here is if you are doing no exercise. So you need more if you're doing any kind of activity. So in terms of nutrient timing, eating within an hour of waking up is going to be really important. It's going to help lower your cortisol, which is naturally going to raise in the morning, which is a good thing. That's when we would want to have it rise. But after you've already gone 8 or more hours without food, providing your body with consistent nourishment when you wake up is going to signal to your body, I'm safe, and it's going to help support your recovery. After that, it's really important to eat every 2 to 3 hours to ensure your body knows that it's going to consistently get fuel. And I know at every 2 to 3 hours, you're like, that sounds like a lot of food. Like, I'm just always going to be thinking about preparing food, eating food, cleaning up from food. But the truth is, when you're in period recovery, you do have to baby your body for a little bit just to have it trust you again. And so that's why you might want to find easier snacks, easier meals, not these big elaborate meals, or maybe ask someone else to cook for you a little bit, just so it's not such a burden when you need to be eating this often. And briefly to talk about intermittent fasting, though it has become popular, fasting wreaks havoc on your hormones, especially in hypothalamic amenorrhea. Fasting can hinder progress because it furthers your overall calorie deficit. It's just really hard to eat the amount of food you need to in a narrow window of the day. As well, when you fast, it's going to cause your blood sugar to go really low, which, as we talked about earlier, is going to increase your cortisol. And you might feel confused because you might have seen a lot of headlines about the benefits of intermittent fasting. But it's important to keep in mind that most of these studies were actually done on men, and that researchers who have done these studies on intermittent fasting actually say that they should research more on women, that there's not enough information to make any conclusions about women yet. And in the studies that do include women, intermittent fasting has actually been shown to be linked to negative effects like a decreased glucose tolerance. On top of that, a Canadian study, because I'm Canadian and love Canada, found that intermittent fasting is actually associated with a higher eating disorder risk in participants. One final thing is that some people suggest that people with estrogen dominance try to do intermittent fasting because fasting has been shown to help lower estrogen, but that's not going to be helpful in hypothalamic amenorrhea because we're trying to do the exact opposite. If your estrogen levels are already too low, we want to get them up. So we don't want to suppress them further. So definitely intermittent fasting is not going to be helpful for period recovery. In terms of different stimulants, alcohol is one that it's not black and white in recovery. So for some women, having a glass of wine on a date night with your husband, that can be a step towards freedom from food rules. At the same time, it's important to understand that alcohol does impact the body in recovery. It can disrupt blood sugar, raise cortisol, and put extra stress on the body, especially when your body's already in that undernourished state. It can also affect gut lining and nutrient absorption. I would say with this one, just moderation is key. With caffeine, we've all had our days way back when we would have black coffee on an empty stomach and just go through the morning. And caffeine is not inherently bad, but it definitely can hinder progress in recovery. Caffeine has been shown to reduce muscle activity in the fallopian tube, impact implantation, and has been shown to reduce reproductive hormones. It's also common to see luteal phase issues, so that second half of your cycle again, have issues with that due to caffeine. So caffeine is not really helpful in HA recovery for those reasons, but another reason it's not always helpful is that it's going to suppress appetite, which is probably why we all drank it black, but it will suppress appetite and raise your cortisol. So what I'd recommend is try to limit your caffeine to 1 cup of coffee a day and don't have it when you first wake up. Wait till, you've already been awake for a few hours, you've already had a good meal. When your cortisol already isn't at its peak, so you don't raise it any further. And if you're willing to give it up, you can try that. I switched to tea with cream in my recovery, and I found that actually helped. When I did it, I got my period back, I don't know, what it was, a week later or something. It was crazy. When it comes to digestive issues in recovery, it's helpful to step back and look at the bigger picture. One of the first things I do with my clients is to know which foods are causing trouble for them right now in terms of digestion, and then compare that to what used to be tolerated for them, even if it was back when they were a kid. And creating a timeline of when symptoms began and when foods were removed or were tried and when their period stopped can help us see important patterns. As well, as I said earlier, our hormones play an important role in our digestion. Foods that we cannot tolerate when we were deep in HA might become more tolerable and even enjoyable with time as we get our hormones back to a healthy point. So if at the beginning of recovery you find it hard to eat the quantity of food you need, because it is quite a bit, maybe compared to what you're used to, the biggest thing I say is just aim for higher fat options and lower volume foods. So celery, kale, cabbage, they're delicious, sure, but they really need to be placed on the back burner when you're in period recovery. When it comes to exercise in recovery, like everything else, there's no single hard or fast rule. It's going to look different for everyone. What's important to understand is that exercise affects the body in 2 major ways. It uses up energy your body desperately needs for healing, so that's one. And the second is it's going to place an extra stress on your system that is already under strain. So you will need to scale back from whatever it is you're doing. And that doesn't mean you'll never be active again. It just simply means that right now you're in a season of healing and movement is going to need to look gentler. In general, some helpful guidelines could be trying to keep your steps less than 5,000 per day, making sure you're not doing any kind of fasted workouts, and fueling with at least 2 full meals before you do any training that day, so like breakfast and lunch. If you can push your training much later into the day, so afternoon or evening, that's also going to help so that you're not exercising again when your cortisol is already high. You also are going to need to make sure you increase the amount of sleep you're doing to accommodate for how much training you're doing. Your overall food intake is going to have to be increased even further from what I described earlier, and making sure that you're having an extra on top of everything we already talked about, snack before you exercise and snack after you exercise. While you're in recovery, you really should choose lower intensity forms of movement instead of things like running or CrossFit. Running especially just seems to be the least tolerated by the body during recovery. So just, you probably want to switch to maybe something a little less intense. You also want to prioritize rest days. So 3 to 4 full rest days each week, and not like an active recovery day where you go, walk 10 kilometers. Research actually has shown that even in athletes that don't have hypothalamic amenorrhea, that 72 hours of rest can actually improve performance. So it's actually quite healthy for you to take a couple full rest days, not just taking 1 day or even 2 days. Another helpful recommendation that I found in my own recovery is making sure you adequately warm up and cool down. It can really help your body switch into its sympathetic nervous system state. And in the past, I would consider the time to warm up and cool down just like a waste of time. I would just start and go straight at it, and then I'd run right to my door and then crash. But warming up and cooling down can help your body switch into, okay, now we're moving, okay, and now I get to calm down again. It can make a big difference. You'll also want to regularly assess whether your current level of exercise is still too much. So, signs that your body isn't coping well might include temperature spikes or drops after training. And I'm going to talk all about tracking your temperature and that kind of stuff in your next module to help make the connection so you can see, is it helping or hurting? So, temperature spikes or drops, your temperature is consistently low. Maybe if you've already had a cycle and in your next one, your ovulation's delayed. If you're having really short luteal phases, or you're ovulating and everything seems fine, but you're not able to get pregnant despite everything else seeming fine. Other red flags are just like if you're like always sore, you don't feel ready to train, you're exhausted, or when you're working out, you're just thinking about food all the time. Those are signs that you're probably not ready yet to jump back completely into training. It's really your body's way of telling you that it needs more rest and nourishment. Sleep is also important in HA because sleep has been shown to both reduce anxiety, and a lack of sleep is a stressor on your body. It's important to consider factors such as sunlight in the morning to support your circadian rhythm. So just like walking outside, you get a little bit of sunlight on your skin. Maybe getting blackout curtains for your room to make sure it's nice and dark at night, especially if you do any kind of shift work. A wind down routine, considering what your exposure to blue light is. Those are all things to consider when it comes to your sleep. Magnesium can be a helpful supplement for some, and of course, like talk about all this with your doctor. But melatonin, I would say, is probably best avoided if possible, mostly because the research on it's mixed. But it's important to remember that melatonin is a hormone, just like how we're talking about estrogen and progesterone and leptin. And hormones, they're going to interact with each other. And so it just like, do you really want to add something else, more fire to a situation that we're already trying to have enough things going on with? You also have to consider the dosage, though, with melatonin. Our bodies naturally produce about 0.3 to 0.8 milligrams, while most supplements for melatonin start at 3 milligrams. So 0.3 to 3 milligrams. So instead of focus, what I would suggest is focusing on building a solid wind down routine and noting that also when you begin recovery, your sleep actually might worsen before it improves. Just something so you know, are aware if that happens. Managing stress is also an important part of HA recovery because psychological stress does impact your recovery journey. So there are many ways to intentionally reduce stress and support your well-being. And I think this is really important because healing, as I said earlier, is both body and soul. And so some of the ways I'm going to suggest to kind of recenter ourselves actually have spiritual significance. Some practices that I like are things like breath prayer, which is when you repeatedly pray scripture out loud. So the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, or something like that, that you can pray in moments of maybe high anxiety or of discomfort. I really like Lectio Divina, which is basically repeatedly listening to scripture. And there's actually a great app for it as well that it will read the scripture to you. Reading the Bible or any book is another idea that you can do, but just be careful what you're reading. Like, don't go for a miracle morning, which is going to try and just get you to do more, get up earlier, and be a go-getter. That's not what you need in period recovery. You could also journal. You could go for a gentle walk, You could do a creative project. So things like maybe doing some art or baking, or you could also just connect with others in a positive community. Maybe not those who are going to, berate bodies or only talk about diets. That's not what you're looking for. You could also seek support from a faith-based counselor or work with an HA recovery coach to manage the details of recovery so that you don't have all that mental load. You'll see how, like everything we're talking about, there's a lot to keep in mind. And so sometimes it's nice to offload that to someone else to worry about those details. And some of these things that I've mentioned can be great for just in those moments of anxiety, of discomfort, or just managing life stress, but also great for that wind down routine in the evening. And at the same time, it's important to recognize common stress triggers that might undermine your recovery, so figuring out what's actually triggering that stress in the first place. So is it that you're working too much? Is it that you're striving for perfection? Is it just like daily life, navigating family or friend dynamics? Is it the caffeine, the amount you're exercising, the amount you're sleeping? Is it you're traveling? Those can add a lot of stress to your already sensitive system. So becoming aware of these triggers and intentionally managing them can create space for your body and mind to offload a little bit. And though we can't avoid all stress, and some stress is healthy, we want to make sure we can address any unneeded stress in our life. And since we're created both body and soul, while all the physical aspects of recovery are crucial, we can't be neglecting the heart. So, in my coaching practice, this means that we do address the spiritual side of healing as well. So, it involves praying for restoration, working through maybe the impact of sin on our lives and how that manifested in our HA days, looking at hypothalamic amenorrhea through the lens of scripture. Recovery is only complete when we care for both the body but also the soul. So, as we wrap up this module, I hope you're starting to see how recovery isn't just about eating more or resting more. You really have to learn how to rebuild your trust with your body. Every nourishing meal, every day you take to rest, or extra hours sleep you get in the morning is a way of you telling your body that you're safe now. These changes, they take courage. They're not easy, but they're really giving you an opportunity for the first time, care for your body the way that it deserves to be taken care of. In the next module, we're going to talk about practical tools to help you track your recovery progress. So things like tracking your temperature, noticing your cervical mucus, just things so that you can see that your body is moving in the right direction. So I'll see you in the next one.